I also, if you don't mind me, Simon, just while we're gearing up for questions, I know that sometimes many of us, myself included, can get carried away with the rhetoric when we're giving our discussions. But I did want to make clear to everyone in the room and also to those watching online that as we're discussing this issue, that not all Democrats have been helpful on this issue, and not all Republicans have been hurtful, and that we have friends on both sides and we have some obstacles on both sides, but this is an issue in which we're going to need to engage all parties and all stakeholders to make sure they participate in this process. And I just want to make sure that as we're engaging in the questions and answers that we just have that context in mind.
Well, and Andres, let me just say one thing connected to that is that, look, other than Barack Obama in the last year, the national leader who really had the most enlightened strategy towards the Latino community and originally towards immigration reform was George Bush, right? I mean, this was, I really believe that I believe the president and the people who work for him, that in some ways what happened inside of his party during his watch with Hispanics and on immigration reform was arguably his greatest disappointment as president, because he was different than Republicans on this issue. Remember, he was elected in 1994 in Texas the same year that Pete Wilson was elected in California. And Pete Wilson took on the immigrants in California and went into the dustbin of history, right? George Bush embraced Latinos in Texas and had a much more enlightened understanding of race and how we were changing as a people. And he wrote it into the White House. There's simply no way, if we had more time today and I went back and showed you the Electoral College maps, it is clear that the thing that swung the Electoral College to Bush was his success with Latinos, right? And I think he really had incredible personal pride about how he was not like those Republicans, those racist Republicans that he was all too familiar with in his political party. So Andres is right. This is not, at the core of this is really modernity, right? Which is the ability for the two political parties to deal with sort of what's in front of them. And one of the things that what's in front of them is that we're heading towards being a majority-minority country. And what's interesting is that the first Democratic Party, other than New Mexico, which is this anomalous state, that became majority-minority was Texas, right? The vote in 2008 in the Democratic primary in Texas, the vote was 52% non-white. In California, in the primary, it was 48, 49% non-white. So not only is the country headed to being majority-minority over time, but I think I believe that, potentially with Michael Steele and with other Republicans, my hope is that you see the Republican Party once again re-adopting the Bush strategy and really contesting and fighting for this vote of all people in the United States, not just, as Ed Gillespie called it, aging white bald men, right, the other day, which seems to be the preferred part of the electorate for the Republican Party today, which of course is a shrinking one. So let's take your questions. And anyone in the audience who's watching online, just follow the directions and shoot them in. So we open it up to all of you.
Rudy Arredondo with the National Latino Farmers and Ranchers. Besides the usual, which is National Council La Raza, MALDEF, LULAC, what about the immigrant organizations? Have you had any contact, or they are going to be a part of this coalition to ensure that they actually do have a voice, not to despair to be disrespectful to the NCLRs and LULACs, but their contact with the immigrant community is peripheral, to say the least.
Is the question related directly to those, or just to all other organizations?
Well, I mean, for instance, who are you working with?
Yeah. Well, we generally keep an open door policy. As we've said, we think this is going to require the involvement of various actors around the country, various parties, and this issue impacts various groups, as Simon said, between whether you're clergy, whether you're business, whether you're labor, whether you're immigrant or you're a civil rights person. We are working with groups such as America's Voice, which is another leading group fighting for immigration reform, working with the National Immigration Forum, working with the folks over at the Chamber of Commerce and other high-tech businesses who are also going to need to play a role in this process. We're working with generally anyone who is sincere about moving this issue forward and putting the thing. That includes working with NCLR, that includes working with MALDIF, that includes working with the Asian organizations and the African American organizations as well, such as the Urban League and the NAACP. There is room for everybody to play, and there's still room for many other people to come and join who haven't sat at the table yet. And so we are welcoming anybody to come. I shouldn't say anybody. We're welcoming everybody to get engaged in this push, because it is something that impacts all of America, and that is something that we feel is the right thing for America to accomplish. But yes, there are various groups out there working and fighting on behalf of immigrants' rights, both at the local level, state level, and national level, who are participating in these coalitions to push forward. And to be honest with you, there's going to be various coalitions. There's not just going to be one. But it's going to require the help of many in order to push this process through.
And I think you're seeing a lot more activity now. Luis Gutierrez and others have been working to really try to build a much more aggressive coalition of recent immigrants and the immigrant groups at the grassroots level. There's a much deeper and broader organization there than there was certainly 2 years ago, 3 years ago. So, we're optimistic. I mean, I think that part of the thing I'll just put on the table is that, we can't get this done without the business community. And they have an important voice in all of this. And I think more has got to be done to bring along recalcitrant Republicans and some in the more enlightened elements of the business community, because we can't really count on all the Democrats to support this. I think we can count on most of the Democrats, right? But I think this is going to require bipartisanship. It's going to require us giving John McCain, I think, once again, a leading role in trying to get this done. He is, up until his presidential run, he was a incredibly enlightened advocate for this issue and for the growing Hispanic community. We need the old John McCain back a little bit, not the McCain that we saw during the presidential race, who kowtowed to sort of elements in his party that I think he regrets, frankly, now looking back on it. So I think we can do this, and I think it's going to, as Andre said, it's going to take both more activity among the immigrant groups and the traditional groups that fight for this kind of stuff, as well as, frankly, the business community who, let's just say, didn't really work all that hard back in the 2007 iteration of this to make this a higher priority. And I think so far we're optimistic that this is possible. And I think if that's the one thing we want to say today, is that the conditions for this happening are much better today than they were, I would argue, even 3 weeks ago. Both Nancy Pelosi and Harry Reid, in their last press conferences last week, said that they now have 3 priorities, 3 legislative priorities: healthcare, climate change, immigration. Both of them said that. They weren't saying that a month ago. They weren't saying that 5 weeks ago. And I think you've seen a real elevation up of this issue, and it means that it's possible, but we have a lot of work to do to sort of get to make sure that we take advantage of the opportunity that we have. Other questions in the room? Yeah, go ahead.
I'll take one. My name is Raul Garcia from the Mexican Embassy. And I wanted to see, in the 2006 movement, you had all of these protests, and you had a lot of mobilization, and you had a lot of NGOs involved. But how do you get all of this push, or all of this pressure that you've mentioned? Obviously, you've made a very tremendous and compelling case for an argument pro-immigrant, pro-comprehensive immigration reform. But how do you actually reach out to the senators and the representatives who are actually going to take a stance on this, that sometimes have even very personal views against this issue? So how do you make this kind of transformation from the general support that you have into the actual votes?
Well, just to touch on that initially, I don't think that we make that case. I think that that's what the community has made. And we saw that, as you said, during the marches in 2006. And then we saw that Hispanics took it the next level, and they became naturalized, and they became citizens. And then took it the next step forward, and they registered themselves to vote. And then completed the final process by actually turning out to vote. Again, as we saw in 2008, and they came out in record numbers. And when you're talking to politicians, support and rallies and letters and this and that matters. It matters a lot. But at the end of the day, what matters generally the most to them is their voters. And when we can convince Hispanics to vote and to vote in large numbers, that will make a great impact. And I don't think we need to make that convincing case anymore. I think the Hispanic community made that case. And that's why the turnout numbers and the voter registration numbers to us are so important, because they took it upon themselves. It was what happened in '06, and you saw the slogans, today we march, tomorrow we vote. And it was a process, it was a promise made that took years to happen, because as many people know, you can't become a citizen overnight, and you can't just register willy-nilly. So it was a process that took place that politicians have time to see, and they soak now. They saw, all right, we saw the marches, we saw the long list of naturalization papers, and we saw over 1 million, we saw the backlogs that happened at the Justice Department who were processing naturalization forms because of the amount of forms that came in of new immigrants wanting to become citizens. And then we saw the huge lines, and we saw the voter turnout. That, to me, is what the ultimate case is going to be to members of Congress, to show them. And yes, not everyone is going to change their mind, and we understand that. But we think there is enough support and enough of a case to convince enough members of Congress to support this that we can pass. And we don't need 100%. We don't need unanimous support. We just need enough to pass it through the chambers, of both chambers in Congress, and that we know the current president will sign it into law.
And just one quick point on strategy is that, there are experienced champions in the Senate of this. I mean, we got this through the Senate in 2006, and Harry Reid, I think, hasn't gotten nearly enough credit for the leadership that he's shown on this. I know that everyone knows that Ted Kennedy was originally the great leader on this, but I think that the power behind the throne has been Harry Reid. And I think Harry Reid wants to do this. He's left S9, the Senate Bill number 9, open for the Comprehensive Immigration Reform Bill. He's announced publicly that he intends to introduce this in the fall. I take him at his word. I think Barack Obama, if you look at all of you who really care about this issue, if you go back and look at the town hall meeting that Barack Obama did in Costa Mesa, California a couple months ago, he got asked about immigration reform. And if you look at his response, and you realize that this is personal to him. His father was an immigrant. I mean, he has the language and the nuance that he used in this open response, right? This wasn't in a sit-down interview with a reporter where he was being more disciplined and controlled, perhaps, where this was him in front of a bunch of voters. And the answer he gave that day to me made it clear to me that Barack Obama wants to do this, right? Regardless of what the White House wants to do. The President of the United States, I think, is there and committed to do this and understands the immigrant experience as deeply and as powerfully as most immigrants in this country, given his own life experience. Finally, I think the challenge is going to be in the House. And I think that part of the reason the House is going to be harder is that it hasn't gone through the deliberation the Senate has gone through. It never came up for a vote. For those of you who tracked this, in 2006, we passed this with 62 votes in the Senate. There was bipartisan, the President of the United States, John McCain, Harry Reid, Ted Kennedy, all working together to get this done. And then Boehner announced that they weren't even going to bring it up for consideration in the House. So it never came over from the Senate to the House for debate. And in 2007, when this ended up failing in the Senate, again because of Republican obstinance, in 2007, again it didn't come back to the House for consideration. So there's never been a serious debate in the House about this issue of comprehensive immigration reform. And I think there isn't opposition, there's just ignorance. And I don't mean ignorance being people being stupid, right? I think it's that there's just lack of knowledge about what the particulars of this issue are in the House. And I think that's a solvable problem. I think that's a problem that the groups and those who care about this, there are probably 100, 120 members that really need to be educated about what comprehensive immigration reform is, what the polling information is, and their hands have to be held a little bit and said it's going to be okay, right? That when you go down, and then in their own polling, they're going to have to use the same language that is in here, because one of the things that Pete Brodnitz and Frank Sherry and the folks in America's Voice have figured out is how to talk about this in plain, simple English that can elicit extraordinary levels of support with typical voters, right? And I think that I think this is a breakthrough. It's why we promote this poll so aggressively, is that this is real world language. This isn't pie in the sky, ivory tower, if you control the debate, you can drive up the numbers. Pete Brodnitz was pollster of the year. His partner is Barack Obama's pollster, one of the most, architect of the Virginia victories. This guy goes into these tough places and wins elections. And the numbers on this are overwhelming. And so I think a lot of what we have to do in the House is we, as a collective family, have a lot of work to do to be respectful of the House members who have fear about this issue. Right? This has been a demagogue, terribly difficult, highly contentious, horribly racist debate happening in the United States in recent years, and walk them through between now and when the vote comes, which will hopefully be in October, November, December, or early next year, to get them to a place where they have greater comfort. I think that is doable. I think that is within the power of our community and the leadership in Washington to get that done. But we also can't be wild-eyed about this. I mean, this is going to be hard, and I think there are a million places along the way where this thing could go off the rails, as it did in 2007. And I think it's going to require patient and steady and stern leadership. And at some point, the White House is going to have to make, I mean, this won't get done without the White House making a decision they want to get it done. And we shouldn't, believe that there's no way the White House can be a follower in this. I mean, they're going to have to be a leader because the basic default right now, I think, among a lot of politicians is, well, we just don't want to deal with this, right? We got so many other things. But as we said earlier, I don't think we have the choice of deferring on this. I mean, I think this is something that has to get done. And for those of us who care about this, if it doesn't get done by, let's say, February, March of next year, we're talking 2011, right at the earliest. Wildly contentious census could actually blow up the entire census process. I mean, the cost of inaction, I think, is massive for the country. And I think it will be hurtful to the Democrats. And I know that my good friends in the House Democratic leadership don't want to become the ones who known as having stuffed the ambitions of Hispanic voters all over the country. I know that they want to be known for things other than that, and that at some point that they're going to come around and really try to engage in this. And once Harry Reid makes it abundantly clear that he's going to move, I think right now the House leadership thinks, well, maybe we don't have to deal with this, right? Maybe we got other things we got to deal with. It's a crowded calendar. Once it becomes clear that this is going to happen, then I think we're going to see a very thoughtful process led by Speaker Pelosi to bring her caucus along and hold their hands through this process. But it's certainly something that the outside groups have to not wait. We have to do our part now, which is part of the reason we're here today. That was a long answer. Hey, Zach, how are you?
Thanks. Zach Paulette with Acorn. I wonder if you could comment some on what you see as the role of the African-American community in this struggle. I think Acorn's membership is primarily Latino and African-American. We find in local communities, when people talk about it, Latino Acorn members and African-American Acorn members, they see it the same way once they have the dialogue. And so we wonder whether this can really be a civil rights effort of passion in the African-American community as well as in the Latino community. Like Bertha Lewis, Acorn's CEO, met with the Congressional Black Caucus on this last week. And there seems to be some energy, but it really hasn't bubbled so much.
So how did that meeting go?
Barbara Lee ran it, and they were there. They talked some about 287G and the way that, look at Arpaio in Arizona, for example, as to the way that, it's such a symbol, and that symbol seemed to resonate because the same way that immigrant families are being attacked is the same way that African-American families were attacked through the whole civil rights struggle. And that was one piece of passion that helped get people. Our view is that one wants it to be not just, yeah, we're for it, but this is the same struggle. And I wonder from your polling or just your knowledge, is that achievable in the next 9 months?
There's no doubt in my mind that this immigration battle is the civil rights battle that we're fighting today, and it is just a continuance of what minority communities have fought for in this country. And I think that there is great allegiances between and opportunities for African-American organizations and voters and Hispanic organizations to participate. Let's not forget, there are many African-American immigrants themselves who are living in this country and who are struggling and who are suffering. And you're right, I think as more leaders are talking to each other, they're beginning to identify the similarities between the struggles that African Americans dealt with in the 60s and 70s and that many people say they still deal with today as a result of the civil rights struggle, and what current Hispanic immigrants and other immigrants are going through. And you know, just outside of that, again, we look at demography, we see elected officials, African-American elected officials, like Maxine Waters and other who have significant amounts of Hispanics who are living in the congressional districts they represent. That we have, you know, several African-Americans elected leaders who are understanding, hey, this is impacting my community, my neighborhood now as well. So I think there are great opportunities, and I think, again, we saw there was one coalition on immigration reform that launched not too long ago where the NAACP was a part of the coalition, and they had Hillary Shelton there to participate with them. And again, and I know that leaders such as Janet Murguia at NCLR has been working with Mark Morial over at the Urban League, and I know that there's greater workmanship and partnership between the various minorities communities to increase that passion and to create that understanding between the various communities that exist. Again, look, we have an African-American president who was elected, as we like to point out, by strong support among Hispanic voters. So there is definitely an affinity and a partnership for these two groups in the United States to not only work together, but to help learn, because I think there is a lot that many in the immigrant struggle can learn from what leaders in the African-American civil rights era learned during their fight, and how we can, you know, not repeat the same mistakes, but help learn from them so we can move this much more effectively and successfully as we go through our own process now in this century.
Anything else, anybody? Any other questions? Yeah, go ahead. Mike?
Hello, is this on? I'm Daniel Galindum with LACLA. My question is simply, what do you make of the fact that the White House has canceled the scheduled meeting with congressional leaders on immigration for the second time? Yeah. Is it significant, and does it mean that the immigration issue is losing priority?
Well, if you let me just clarify the question. They haven't canceled the meeting. They've rescheduled the meeting.
They haven't announced a date, though, have they?
I think that's supposed to be announced this week, what the confirmed date, but all sources are that it'll be happening either the next week or soon. But, I mean, when you cancel a meeting, it's just not going to happen again, and these meetings are just being rescheduled, so I just want to make sure that we're clear on that. But
yeah, look, I don't think it means anything. I mean, they've, you know, Barack's talked about this. Congressional leadership have said this is one of the top 3 issues. A year from now, no one's going to remember what little meeting happened when with what folks. So the question will be is, and in part, I think the Obama administration views this as a fall issue, and they're really busy right now. I mean, I think this issue of them, this issue of right now, the systems of government being focused on climate change, healthcare. Now Iran's going to start, or what's happening in the Middle East is going to start taking up more mind share, is that I think in some ways inside the White House this was seen as we had time to think about this, and we did, and I don't know that they're totally ready to jump into this, and I would rather them take more time to sort of get themselves to a place where they're ready to go than jump into this before they're really ready. Because if they make early mistakes, it could be a tremendous setback. So my own view on this is that I'm actually glad they've done what they did so far, because it shows that they're serious about doing this right as opposed to doing it fast, and which is what I think our preference would be. And as I said, you know, Obama has said, and his promise was action in the first year. He didn't say we will pass it all the way through and make it law. He has committed to significant progress and action on it. And that's going to be something that's going to be difficult for him to not actually see through, because that promise was clear. And so I think we're going to be here all the way through Christmas. I think there's going to be 4 very full months to get a lot of things done in the fall, and I think there's plenty of room in the calendar to begin to have a serious debate about this in the fall. My preference would be for it to start within a week or 2 after Sotomayor became the first Latina Supreme Court justice, and the several weeks of remarkable press that's going to come out of that, which would then be a great, I think, prelude to the successful carry through on comprehensive.
I think it's also important just to add on that this White House meeting is just one step in the process, and that, you know, we're not going to have a bill come out of this meeting. We're going to have a discussion, and it's a kickstart to Obama's efforts and how he wants to move forward. But I don't think it's going to be different than what we saw with Obama in his energy meetings or in his healthcare meetings. He convened a group of people to start the dialogue of how he'd like to see the debate go, but there was no bill that came out of this. And President Obama has tremendous respect, being a former senator, for the congressional process, and he understands that this is going to come out of Congress, and it's going to be a bill that he signs. We're seeing movement in the Senate. We're seeing movement in the House. And so I think this is fine. I think it's important for us as a community, for us as pundits, for us as people who are interested, to understand that this White House meeting is just one meeting, and it is just one step in the process. And we shouldn't overhype it as this is what's going to determine everything that happens this year or what happens with this bill. Because, again, as we're seeing with healthcare and as we're seeing with energy, what has happened since those meetings at the White House has changed and it's adapted, and that will happen. This is a fluid process, and it's a healthy process. And I think we're going to see that happen with immigration, and I think we're going to be happy with the ultimate outcome.
Any last questions, anybody?
Right here.
Yes, sir.
My name is Max Castro from the Embassy of Mexico. And I was wondering, from the 3 points that you previously mentioned about the immigration reform, what other things could be added, and to what extent are those feasible?
I don't think we know. And the question was, will the bill expand or contract from sort of the core 3 principles that have guided this debate? I would be surprised if there was a significant shift in the structure. It doesn't mean there couldn't be small changes, but in terms of the goal of the legislation, which is to toughen up. I mean, the language I use in this is to get tougher on the border and in the workplace, deal with future flow, and create immediate legal status and a path to citizenship. I would be surprised if the bill wasn't constructed in exactly those 3 ways. What then, though, follows from that, and what is border enforcement and cracking down on employers, and can we actually really have an E-Verify system, for example, that allow employers to really know whether their workers are legal? I mean, I think there are huge issues. I mean, I think there are going to be debates within that framework, but I would be surprised if that wasn't, the final framework. I think one of the areas to watch is going to be on what we call future flow. I think that where there's been sort of the most debate, perhaps, so far in the Democratic side is there a way to change future flow that was different from what had come before McCain-Kennedy? And I think you could see significant debate about that, without getting into all the particulars soon. But I don't think it's going to change all that much. And the polling data shows that Americans are very comfortable and supportive of this construct. And frankly, this was an old-fashioned bill. I mean, I want to again give John McCain and Ted Kennedy tremendous credit. This bill was built in obscurity. I mean, this is before this thing sort of rose to national prominence as an issue. So they had time, and there were a lot of meetings with stakeholders, and everyone gave a little bit and got a little bit. This was an old-fashioned bipartisan bill that worked very well to build a broad coalition. This was a well-constructed bill that went a long way to actually solving the problem that was identified, which is not the case all the time in Washington, right? And so that's one of the reasons I think this thing is held up, was that McCain and Kennedy and their staff did a phenomenal job, and the outside groups, and in part because they could do this because no one cared about this issue in 2005 when they were off building this by themselves. It was only when Sensenbrenner sort of pushed this into the national debate in the fall of 2005 where this thing all of a sudden became a national issue. So I think this will hold, and I think we could talk to you more privately about sort of ways we think this is going to flow. But I think Harry Reid knows that he got 62 votes on this construct in a Republican Senate. And I think, as you know, politicians don't try to change things that ain't broke, right? And so I think there's going to be resistance coming from the political leaders towards significant change. It doesn't mean that there won't be opportunity for improvement in all this.
And I would just add that I agree with Simon. I think the basic construct will remain the same. I mean, there might be minor provisions that deal with the backlog on naturalizations, that deal with how immigrants are being treated in the detentions, on fees, on raids, on whether we put a hold on raids at the moment in workplace or not. And I think those things, or how they are conducted in the future, I think there are things that may be discussed and may be included in the bill. And I don't want to make it sound as if they shouldn't be discussed or included, but they may be dealt with separately. They may be dealt included. But I think this is the basic construct that everything else will revolve around on.
Anything else? Any final question, anybody? Well, thank you all for coming. For those of you who enjoyed the conversation today, there will be the video of this, along with the documents you saw, will be online either late today or early tomorrow morning, as well as a link to some of the other things we've written about this. This is something, as all of you know, who know NDM, that is close to our heart, and I am optimistic that with strong leadership and continued powerful advocacy that we can see, we can get this done this year or early next year. And I think the conditions are right for it, and they're getting better. And so thank you all for being here and being part of this. Thanks, everybody.